Morning. Okay, today's share is going to pick up from where we left off last week. We've been going through mitzvos hatliyos ba'aretz, those commandments that depend on living in Eretz Yisrael. And we've been concentrating on those that are concerned with agricultural produce. We're not talking, let's say, about Masar Behema. Okay. Most people don't think about Masar Behema, but they actually come across a reference to it 3 times a year when we talk and we say in Nisana Toka, Kavakoras Roa Edro, Ma'avir Tsono Tacha Shifta. We're talking about God looking at all human beings one at a time as they pass before him. Of course, it's in one look. The Mishnah emphasizes that it's in one look. But the image of going before the shepherd is from what the Torah describes the issue of Masar Behema. Okay. All right, what are they? Let's stick with produce now, agricultural produce. So what do we have? First thing we had was what you're not allowed to do. So that was kilayim and orla. 3 years. Fruit tree, can't eat from it for 3 years. What's the next step? Next step is finally, you planted properly. You waited properly. And now the crop comes in. Bikurim is when the first ripe produce comes. You separate it for Bikurim to come to bring it to the Beis HaMikdash. That's that. Okay. You go out and you harvest your field, and now you have to worry about lechet, shicha, peah, peret, all of those, whether it's your grain field or whether it's an olive grove or whether it's a vineyard. You have to leave the gleanings for the poor. Okay. So you leave it for them. All right. So finally, you're collecting it, you're bringing it into the house. Now that you're bringing it into the house, we have to worry about Truma Masa. You're not allowed to eat it. It's a Chiyuv Misa if you do, if you don't separate Truma. So Truma, you give a bit to the Kohen. You give a bit to the Kohen. And Min HaTorah, 1 stalk, let's say, of grain, you yaitza. Presumably in the vineyard, 1 grape, you do yaitza. You fulfilled your obligation. Chachamim say that it ranges between 1 and 2/3% to 2.5%, depending on how generous you are. Okay. So that's Truma. Right now we have given Truma. Can we eat? Not so fast. Not yet. So let's see. Let's go to the share screen. Here we are. All right. What does the Rambam say? The Rambam says, after you separate out your Truma Gedola, regular Truma, Mafrish Echad Me'asarom and Hanashar, you have to now take it of what is left over, okay? You take a tenth. You take a tenth of that. So what it's really saying is, namely, let's say you took off 2%, which is Benoni for Truma, you're left with 98% of your original crop. Now you take 9.8% of the original crop, 10% of what we have now. V'zehu hanikra maaser rishon. That's the first maaser. Ubon ne'amar ki es ma'asar b'nei Yisrael asher yarimu la'Hashem, etc. V'hamaaser hazel la'leviyim zecharimu nekevos shene'amar v'levnei Yisrael levnei Levi hine nasati kol ma'asar b'Yisrael and So you give maaser to the Levi. Well, can the Levi eat it? The answer is no. He has to take a tenth of what he receives and give that to the Kohen. That is trumas maaser. So in the hands of the Levi, it is tevel the way The way it was tevel by the ordinary, by the Yisrael before he gave truma to the Kohen, the Maser Rishon now is like tevel to the Levi until he gives Maser Rishon to the Kohen. Trumas Maser to the Kohen. Okay. Now the fellow has already separated Truma Gedola and Maser. The Levi took care of his business. Okay, now he can eat his Maser because he gave Trumas Maser. What happens next? What happens next is the following. After you give the first tenth, Mafrishin Maaser Sheni, you separate another tenth. Shenemar Aser Tiaser is called for Azarecha. Uvashanosh Lishis Veshishis Mafrishin Maaser Ani Chelaf Maaser Sheni Kamosha Biyarnu. Chelaf means in place of. You switch. So what happens? We have the Shemitah cycle of 7 years. The 7th year, nothing happens with Truma and Maser because it's all hefker. So in the first 6 years, the first and second year, one separates Maser Sheni. We don't say yet what we do with it. It's separated Maser Sheni. So that's in the first and second year. The third year, we separate Maser Oni. That Maser goes to the poor. Okay? And there is no Maser Sheni. That's what the Rambam is saying. Chelef Maser Sheni. And then in the fourth and fifth year, we separate Maaser Sheni, and in the sixth year, we give Maaser Roni. That's the law of Maaser Sheni and Maaser Roni. All right, Maaser Sheni, what do you do with it after you separate? Maaser Sheni ne'echol leba'alav lifnim michamasi Yerushalayim. It has to be eaten inside the walls of Yerushalayim, namely within the precincts of the city. Where he is actually, the place where he chooses to dwell. I said, this is an awkward law. You have to separate Ma'aser Sheni, whether the Beis HaMikdash is here or whether it is not here. Aval eno ne'echal b'Yerushalayim elo b'fnei habayis shenemar ma'asar degoncha tiroshcha v'yitzarecha b'koros b'korcha b'tzonecha. Mipi hashmuel lamdu ma b'chor eno ne'echal elo b'fnei habayis af ma'asar sheni lo yochal b'fnei elo b'fnei habayis. The same way that when you have an animal, a bechor, and you bring it for a korban, you only eat it, you only have a korban when there is a Beis HaMikdash. Okay? We'll talk about the wrinkle in this law next week. Af Maaser Sheni lo yochal b'fnei habayis. The same way, you can only eat Maaser Sheni when there is a Beis HaMikdash. So what do you do? Well, Midas Chasidus, shepodim Maaser Sheni b'zman hazeh b'shavyo k'derech shepodin oso b'fnei habayis. Midat Chasidut, the truly pious way is to redeem Maaser Sheni, to take away its kedusha, you put it into coins. Exactly dollar for dollar. The worth of the Maaser Sheni, that's how many coins you separate for it. What is this business of redeeming Maaser Sheni? Redeeming Maaser Sheni is simple. The Torah says explicitly you have to bring the fruits to Yerushalayim. But what if you live far away and it's too much to carry the fruit, whether it's too heavy or whether the distance is so great the stuff will rot on the road? Okay, so what you do is you exchange the Maaser Sheni for its value in money, take that money to Yerushalayim, and there you buy the foodstuffs that will replace the Maaser Sheni, and you eat them in Yerushalayim. So now that there is no Beis HaMikdash, the Midat Chasidut is to redeem Maaser Sheni K'dei Shovyo at its value. Nonetheless, Horu Hagaonim Shim Ratzolif Dos Shav Emana Bepruta. If a person wants to just take 1 penny versus $100 of fruit, put 1 penny of coin, Shav Pruta, Lechatchila Bezman Hazepo, that he actually redeems it nowadays, and he doesn't have to even think of it as the B'di'evin. Lo Yehiyeh Zechomer Min HaKodesh. It's no different from hektish. When a person makes hektish, you can redeem it relative to with a pruta. Umashlicha pruta liyam hagadol, and then you have to dispose of the coin in a way that it's irretrievable. Okay, all right. Someone in the live share asked me, "What happens if you bring your fruit to Yerushalayim? What do you do then?" So for a second I hesitated, but it's explicit in the Rambam. Eno nechal ela b'fnei habayis. You can't eat it. Okay. Can you take it back out? You can't take it back out of Yerushalayim either. Can you redeem it? No. Once original fruit of Maaser Sheni comes to Yerushalayim, can't redeem it, because the whole purpose of redemption is to avoid the trip. Okay. Once the actual fruit shows up in Yerushalayim, you can't redeem it. So nowadays it's Yirkav. You just have to set it aside and let it really rot. Okay. We'll deal with a Rambam that seems to be difficult next week in the Hilchos Beis HaBechira, when we talk about Kedusha Rishona, Kitchel L'Shait, or Ula Osad Lovo, or not La Osad Lovo. We'll talk about that next week. Okay. And now he says as follows: Yeroy Ali, She'ein din Neta Ravai Noheg B'chutz La'aretz. Now we're going to Neta Ravai. Recall what Neta Ravai is. Neta Ravai is similar to Maaser Sheni in the following sense. A person plants a fruit tree, doesn't eat any of it for 3 years. Now comes the 4th year, he has to bring the fruit to Yerushalayim to eat it. So the question is, does Neta Ravai apply in Chutz La'aretz or only in Eretz Yisrael? He says, Yeroyally, apparently it's not absolutely explicit in the Gemara. So that's why you get this Yeroyally. Ella ochel pera shana revius below pidyon klal. Outside of Eretz Yisrael, you simply go ahead and just eat the 4th year. You just eat to your heart's content. Shelo amru ella ha'orla, that you have to keep orla b'chutz la'aretz. V'kam chomer hadvarim. Uma Surya. Syria, remember, is a lot of modern day Syria, yeah? The Rambam says it goes up to Aleppo, so it clearly includes Damascus, etc., not just the Golan. Uma Surya, shehi chayeves b'ma, actually Golan is different. It's called Eretz Sichon va'od. It's not really Syria. Uma Surya, shehi chayeves b'masros u'b'shvius midivreihem. In Syria, you have to give maaser and you have to worry about shvius midrabanan. Ena chayeves b'neta ravai, kamoshi yizbor b'hilchos maaser sheni. All right, this is in some place else, so he's referring to Hilchos Maaser Sheni. So in Syria, there is no Neta Ravai. Chutz La'aretz lo kol sheken shelo yehiyeh Neta Ravai no hegbo. Avo ba'eretz Yisrael no hegbo bein b'fnei habayis bein shelo b'fnei habayis. So it's already exactly the same as Maaser Sheni. Okay, and you can't eat it outside. So apparently, v'horu miktzas ga'onim. Some Gaonim insisted on redeeming Kerem Ravai in Chutz La'aretz. V'hora mitzas gaonim shekera v'ayla vado podino so b'chutz la'aretz. Some gaonim thought that you have to redeem kera v'rvai in chutz la'aretz, outside of Eretz Yisrael. V'achar kach yem mitor b'achilo v'en ledavar ze ikar. The Rambam just pushes that away. Okay, so chutz la'aretz, according to the Rambam, you just the fourth year, just eat it and don't worry about it. Okay, the last thing that we'll discuss is challah. Challah is now we finally done everything. Truma, masa, hakol. And now we're kneading dough from one of the 5 grains. So now the question is, turns out you have to give, from the dough, you have to give something to the Kohen. Okay. Halacha Aleph. Mitzvah aseh lahafrish truma min ho'isol lakohen. From the dough, you have to separate truma for the Kohen. Shenema reishis harisos hechem chalot harimu truma. You have to give truma. You have to. It's like a truma. Okay. V'reishizo ein lo shiyam min haTorah. Again, afilu hifish kisa ora. He pulled off from the dough the size of a pea. Potaras hoisa. The whole thing is he's already fulfilled his obligation. The other side of the coin is v'ha'oseh kol yisoso chala lo aso klum ad she'yishayer miktzoso. A person who wants to take the whole dough, the whole batch, and say the whole thing is challah to give to the Kohen, he did nothing. The point is, it has to be reishis. Then it has to be a part of the challah that is separated for the Kohen. Okay, giving it all to the Kohen isn't enough. It's probably grist for the mill for the darshanim here, I would think. When we divrei sofrim, now we said again, there's no shear, and we said by truma there was no shear, but there was no fixed amount min haTorah, but otherwise the chachamim gave a measure. So the answer is midivrei sofrim, ma shemafrishin echad me arba'o ve'esrim min ho'isa. You give a drop more than 4%. Okay, a drop more. 1 out of 24 from the isa, from the dough. The point is that in this case, there's a verse that gives a sense of that shiur. Why? Shenema titein lo, give to him. So Chazal learned ten lo davar hara'ui litno b'matana. You have to give an amount that constitutes a gift. Okay, so they say 124. V'hanachtum a baker, oselim kor bashuk. So when he makes dough, he needs dough in tremendous volumes because he's selling to the marketplace. He's not doing it only for a household. Mafrish achad mishmano v'arboim. Then he gives only 148. Okay. Lefishi isa so meruba, because it's so tremendous. Yesh b'siyur zeh kadei matana. Namely, if from his big thing he gives only a little more than 2% of it, then we're okay. Then it's a substantial amount that constitutes a gift to the Kohen. Ein chayavim b'chala min haTorah ela be'eretz Yisrael bilvad. The mitzvah of challah is only in Eretz Yisrael. Shene'amar v'haya ba'ochlachem milechem ha'aretz. But here's the this is something we met before. Okay. Ubizman shekol Yisrael sham. This is when all the Jews are in Eretz Yisrael. Shene'amar b'voachem bias kolchem v'lo bias miktzaschem. Okay. That only when it says b'voachem you should give truma. So b'voachem they learn is bias kolchem. All right. And therefore he says everybody, the whole body politic, the Jewish people have to come into Eretz Yisrael. Uleficha chala bezman hazeh afilu b'mei Ezra be'Eretz Yisrael eino ala midavrehem k'moshe b'yarnu b'truma. Chala bezman hazeh, That means even during the second Beis Hamikdash, Afilu Beis Mei Ezra Eretz Yisrael Elami Devrehem. Why? Because not all the Jews came. In fact, an embarrassingly small percentage of Jews returned to Eretz Yisrael from Bavel. Okay? So it means that throughout the whole second Beis Hamikdash and nowadays, everywhere in the world, Challah is midrabanan. Okay. The Bavorachem is accepted pretty much by everyone. There was one sheet in the Gemara, I think, that thinks that Challah today might be the Eraisa. There was a number of people who argued that, and it was argued against them because of the Bavorachem, and that seems to be the final word. What the Rambam is referring to, Eno Elam Midivreim Kamosha Bayarnu Betruma, it's a little, ever so slightly backward. The point is, Truma was written, Hilchas Truma is the main place where he spoke about Eretz Yisrael and the mitzvos that are Midiaraisa Midirabbanan, in these mitzvos Hatliyos Ba'aret. But the fact is that in Truma itself, the Rambam we studied said that Truma was midivreihem bisman hazeh for the same reason. Now there, the reason is a little difficult. Okay, why is that? Because the Rambam quotes a verse, Kisavohu, and the Kisavohu he wants to treat as Bavoachem. Now, Kisavo is at the beginning of Bahar, and it's written about Shemitah. Okay. It's about Shemitah. Okay. And the Rambam wants to take that Kisavo and turn it into Truma, that it has the same law of Bavachem. Okay. There's a famous Reb Chaim on the Rambam that says about Truma that there's a big difference between Bavoachem and Challah. There's a difference between Bavoachem and what we say in Yovel, Kol Yoshvei Alecha. You know, Yovel requires, someone raised this in the live share a couple of weeks ago, that Yovel also has this law that all Jews have to be there, have to be in Eretz Yisrael. And it seems from Reb Chaim, I have to go back and look at it and do it carefully. It seems from Reb Chaim that if Jews come back to, if there is Yovel min HaTorah, and all of a sudden Jews leave, and then Jews come back, Yovel, so while they were away, there was Kol Yoshvei Alecha. When they came back, Yovel kicks in again. Okay? How that works is very murky, all right? But it's theoretically possible that if the whole Jewish people come to Eretz Yisrael at any point, Yovel will kick in, okay? Reb Chaim says that Bavoachem, by Challah, is different. It has to do when the Jews first enter Eretz Yisrael, okay? So when he says Challah b'zman hazeh afilu b'me'ezer b'Eretz Yisrael, even if everybody went back to Eretz Yisrael, because we're the kedusha of Eretz Yisrael is from kedushas Ezra that we have now, okay. Challah would still remain. Challah would still remain midrabanan. Namely, Challah will only return to being kedusha midiraisa at the third time in the future. That seems to be Reb Chaim. I'll have to, I keep that open right now, subject to correction, okay? So that's the wrinkle. So I think we'll stop with this now, with the mitzvahs of Atliyos Ba'aretz, the grain and the produce. We've done quite a bit. And I think next week is in the middle of the 9 days. I think it's good to talk a little about Kedushas Yerushalayim, and the issue of what we've met of Kedusha Rishona, is it Kidsha Lashata? When Yeshua came, was his Kedusha forever? Or it was Lashata, Velola Osid Lavo? And if that's the case, what about Kedusha Shniya? Is that only Lishata? Is it only for its time? Or is that permanently forever? So we'll talk a little about it next time. Oh, by the way, it's been rolling around in my mind ever since I said it. When I talked about Lechet Shechilpeya, I mentioned that olive trees is Lechet Shechilpeya. But we had learned that olive trees was a model for all fruit trees. We had learned that explicitly a couple of weeks ago. It was rolling around in my mind. I didn't want to interrupt, so I'm correcting it now before we sign off. Okay, so we'll see you next week.